People love believing they're smarter than the system, especially when it comes to money they don't actually have. I've watched this for nearly a century. Brilliant people, educated, successful, destroying themselves with debts they thought they could control. They call it leverage. I call it legalized self-deception. And if you're sitting there right now debating whether to invest or pay off your debts, you're already on the wrong side of the fence. You've allowed the idea of owing to become normal. That's how every financial disaster starts. One clever justification at a time. People think debt is harmless if it's used wisely. They tell themselves stories. My debt is cheap. My returns are high. So I'm winning. No, you're not winning. You're juggling fire in a room full of petrol. I've never met anyone who went broke without first owing money to someone. That's not coincidence. It's nearly a law of nature. The smartest investors I know don't sleep better because they own brilliant stocks. They sleep better because nobody owns them. You don't build rational wealth carrying irrational weight on your back. You don't think long-term when you owe in the short term. And you can't call yourself free when someone else controls your next payment. Here's something nobody tells you. Debt changes how you think. It forces short-term decisions, kills patience. And patience in investing, that's oxygen. I've seen people brag about beating the market whilst carrying high-interest loans. That's like bragging you can swim faster with pockets full of rocks. Eventually you sink. When I was young, the Great Depression was still alive in everyone's memory. People knew pain. They feared debt like they feared disease. And that fear kept them financially alive. Today, we treat debt like vitamins. Everyone takes it. Nobody thinks it can kill. But debt doesn't kill fast. It kills silently when your luck runs out. You want to invest? Fine. But don't call it investing if you're doing it with borrowed money. That's gambling in a suit. The only difference between a gambler and a leveraged investor is that the gambler knows he's gambling. I've seen leverage destroy people 10 times smarter than you. And intelligence doesn't protect against compounded stupidity. The maths of debt is brutal. It compounds against you with perfect discipline. And compounding, whether working for you or against you, never sleeps. I've always said, the first rule of compound interest is never interrupt it unnecessarily. Well, debt is the interruption. It's a parasite that feeds on your future. People ask me, Charlie, what if my debt is at 3% and I can invest at 7%? Well, genius, what if that 7% disappears? What if your investment drops 40%? What if you lose your job next month? Debt doesn't care about your projections. Debt collects always. It's funny how people complicate something simple. You don't need a spreadsheet to know what's right. You need common sense. If you owe, pay. If you're free, stay free. Because freedom compounds better than any stock I've ever owned. In the end, wealth isn't about how much you earn. It's about how little you owe. When you owe nothing, every unit of money that comes in is entirely yours. And when you control your time, your decisions, your peace, that's real wealth. So, before you chase the next investing trend, ask the right question. Are you building freedom or just decorating your own prison? That's the real point. People like to think money is about emotion. It's not. It's arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care about your feelings, your optimism, or your sophisticated investment theories. Let's talk simple maths. Napkin maths. If you owe £10,000 at 15% interest, that's a guaranteed loss of 1,500 quid a year. You can't diversify that away. You can't hedge it. It's a guaranteed negative return. Now tell me, where are you going to find a guaranteed positive 15% return in the market without taking risk? You won't. At least not legally. That's the brutal beauty of debt. It's certain. And certainty is the most dangerous thing in finance when it's working against you. I've seen thousands of people obsessed with portfolio allocation whilst ignoring interest eating their finances alive. They debate whether to have 5% more in one stock or 5% less in another, whilst the credit card compounds faster than any of those companies will ever grow. That's not investing. That's intellectual theater. It looks smart, but it's pure stupidity. You don't fix a leaking boat by buying a bigger engine. You fix the hole first. Debt is the hole. Investing before you patch it is just rowing faster toward the iceberg. People say, "But Charlie, the market returns 10% on average per year." Yes, over long periods. And if you've got the stomach to handle a 50% drop without panicking, most people don't have that stomach. They have a pulse. And when the market falls, so does their confidence. Meanwhile, debt keeps compounding like a metronome. Steady. Relentless. Indifferent to market mood. The maths doesn't care if the index recovers in 2 years or 10. The creditor wants payment next month. When you owe, you're living in a race between compound interest and compound wisdom. Most people lose because they underestimate how fast stupidity compounds. You don't think clearly when the meter's running. Debt taxes your mind before it taxes your wallet. You start making urgent decisions, not intelligent ones. You sell early. Buy late. Start praying for miracles. That's not rational investing. That's survival mode. I've always said, if you can't handle a little misfortune, you don't deserve good fortune. But when you're leveraged, even small misfortune can destroy you. That's why I've seen more investors ruined by debt than by bad stocks. A bad stock teaches humility. Debt teaches desperation. If you really understood maths, you'd treat high-interest debt like your house is on fire. You wouldn't stand there analyzing the architecture. You'd run. You'd pay it off, even if it meant postponing your grand investment dreams. Once I told a student who wanted to invest whilst carrying credit card debt, "You're asking me if you should invest or pay off a guaranteed 20% obligation per year. That's like asking if you should drink water or petrol." The correct answer is obvious. It's just inconvenient. And people don't like inconvenient truths. The truth is, paying off debt is the best risk-free return you'll ever find. It's boring, yes. But staying solvent is boring too. Everyone wants excitement. Until excitement arrives in the form of a margin call. Then they discover that boredom is vastly underrated. The best investors I've known, including Warren, never saw debt as some miraculous leverage tool. They saw it as a virus. You contain it early, or it spreads until it kills you. So when you ask me, should I invest or pay debt, I answer like this. The person without debt can wait for the right opportunity. The person in debt has to beg for one. And the market, my friend, does not reward begging. You can't think clearly when you owe money. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are. Debt reprograms your brain. I've seen brilliant people lose the plot because they spent more time calculating what they owed than what they owned. When you owe, your world shrinks. Every decision becomes defensive. You stop thinking about opportunity and start thinking about survival. That's not freedom. That's servitude with Wi-Fi. People like to say debt is a tool. Yes. The same way a chainsaw is a tool. Useful in experienced hands, catastrophic in careless ones. And financially speaking, most people are careless. There's something deeply corrosive about owing money. It erodes your independence, changes how you speak to your boss, makes you tolerate things you shouldn't, teaches you to rationalize instead of resist. That's why I've always respected the old idea of living within your means, not because it's virtuous, but because it's practical. You don't build good judgment in a mind permanently under pressure. You need mental space to think. And debt rents that space to someone else. I've seen people make absurd investment decisions just to chase losses. They run toward speculative stocks, panic buy crypto, listen to idiots on telly screaming about fast returns, and tell themselves, I just need one big win. That's not investing. That's desperation with a spreadsheet. The irony is, indebted people often work harder than anyone, but their effort compounds for someone else. Their time becomes interest income for the bank. And the bank, as you may have noticed, doesn't get tired. You don't buy peace of mind on credit. You only rent it for a while until the bill arrives. That's why I've never understood this obsession with good debt and bad debt. Both are dangerous. One kills you slowly, the other quickly, but both take your sleep. Want to build real wealth? Start by eliminating financial anxiety. That's the foundation. Every unit of debt you eliminate is one fewer link in the chains around your mind. And a free mind is the most powerful compounding machine that exists. When I was a young lawyer, I had little, but I owed nobody. That made me dangerous, in the best sense. I could walk away from bad deals. I could say no without fear. That single advantage, independence, was worth more than any leverage ratio. Most people never realize that the true return of paying debt isn't just financial. It's psychological. It gives you back optionality, gives you back the ability to wait. And patience, I've said this 1,000 times, is the rarest form of intelligence in investing. So ask yourself, what's your goal here? To look rich or to be free? Because if you choose the first, the second never comes. Every generation convinces itself it's reinvented the meaning of debt. They invent pretty names. Smart leverage, capital optimization, financial efficiency. But strip away the jargon, and it's the same old stupidity in new clothes. Leverage, in any form, amplifies outcomes, good and bad. The problem is, human nature guarantees the bad shows up sooner or later. And when it does, leverage turns a stumble into freefall. I've seen this film too many times. It always starts the same. Someone borrows money to accelerate gains, tells themselves they're being rational, just using other people's money intelligently. And for a while, it works. Makes a few good trades. The numbers look brilliant. Confidence skyrockets. They start believing they've mastered risk. Then the market sneezes. Interest rates tick up a bit. One deal goes wrong. And suddenly everything they built starts collapsing like wet paper. That's not bad luck. That's arithmetic meeting reality. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're too leveraged, you don't own the assets. They own you. You're just renting the illusion of prosperity. In the 1970s, Warren and I watched brilliant people blow themselves up with borrowed money. Didn't matter how good the businesses were. A few bad quarters and the creditors came knocking. The graveyard of capitalism is full of geniuses who over-optimized the balance sheet. To this day, I see people justifying leverage because interest rates are low. That's like saying you should play Russian roulette because this time the odds are small. Eventually, the cylinder spins. The real tragedy is that leverage doesn't just destroy portfolios. It destroys temperament. You can't stay calm when a few bad weeks can ruin you. You can't think long-term when the short-term can kill you. When fear enters the equation, intelligence exits. That's why we built Berkshire Hathaway with virtually no debt. Not because we didn't understand leverage, but because we understood it too well. We wanted to survive any scenario, not just shine in the easy ones. The ability to sit still whilst everyone panics is the greatest edge that exists. And you can't do that if the bank is holding your nerves. People ask me, what about using debt to buy property or invest in a business? I say, if you need to borrow heavily for the deal to close, the deal isn't good enough. Simple as that. The best opportunities don't need leverage to be worthwhile. They're good even with conservative financing. The moment your investment success depends on the goodwill of creditors, you've stopped being an investor. You've become a hostage. I've heard people brag about borrowing at 3% to invest at 6%. I say, you're earning 3% and risking 100. They don't like that answer. Most people don't. They prefer a pleasant illusion to an unpleasant truth. The truth is, leverage makes you fragile, turns a temporary setback into permanent loss, punishes arrogance faster than stupidity, and guarantees that one day you'll meet the margin call agent, the cruelest teacher in finance. If you don't sleep well at night, you're over-leveraged. If a market drop destroys your plans, you're over-leveraged. If you need good luck to stay solvent, you're not an investor. You're a speculator praying for mercy. My advice? Don't play with borrowed matches. The house always catches fire faster than you imagine. People think the goal is to get rich. It's not. The real goal is independence. You don't want more money to buy more things. You want it so you can stop doing stupid things. And nothing is more stupid than trading freedom for leverage. Debt sells the illusion of progress. It whispers, you can have it now and pay later. But later always arrives. And when it does, it collects with financial and psychological interest. I've seen people chain themselves to jobs they hate because they need the income. Seen families postpone happiness for decades because of manageable mortgages. Seen investors with brilliant judgment making cowardly decisions because loans dictated their behavior. That's not wealth. That's slavery in a tie. Freedom doesn't come from having more. It comes from owing less. When you owe nobody, you can think clearly. You can say no when everyone else has to say yes. You can ignore the crowd, the panic, the noise, because you're not desperate. People underestimate the power of that. Independence is like oxygen. You don't notice it until you lose it. In the 1990s, I watched an entire generation borrow against their homes to buy tech stocks. They thought they were clever. Called it financial engineering. Then the bubble burst, and they discovered a simple truth. You can't eat paper profits when the margin call arrives. The irony is, those who avoided leverage looked boring for years until everyone else exploded. Then suddenly the boring bloke became a genius. That's the summary of capitalism in one sentence. I've said this 1,000 times. You don't need to be smarter than everyone. You just need to stay sane longer than everyone. And that's impossible when you're leveraged. A lot of people think I'm obsessed with avoiding debt. They're right. I am. Because I've seen what happens when life doesn't follow the plan. And it never does. You lose your job, get ill, the market collapses. And those who survive aren't the ones with the biggest portfolio. They're the ones with the smallest obligations. That's the paradox of wealth. The freer you are, the richer you feel. And that feeling doesn't come from the brokerage account. It comes from control. Control over your time, your choices, your peace of mind. That's why I say, the best investment you'll ever make isn't in a stock or a company. It's in buying back your own independence, one piece of debt at a time. There's no price tag on sleeping soundly. You don't compound wisdom under pressure. And you don't make rational decisions while someone has a claim on your future. When you're debt-free, you can wait for the right pitch. When you're leveraged, you're forced to swing at every ball that comes. That's the difference between discipline and desperation. So yes, freedom beats leverage every single time. It may seem slower, less exciting, but it's permanent. And in a world built on volatility, permanence is the greatest competitive advantage that exists. You'd imagine that after centuries of financial disasters, people would have learned. But they haven't. Every generation starts from scratch with the same illusions. All believe they've found a smarter way to balance debt and investment. The young call it using leverage responsibly. The older ones call it making money work for me. And everyone forgets that money only truly works when you're not chained to it. I've said it before. The human mind is brilliant at self-deception. We rationalize stupidity faster than we correct it. So when people say, "I'll invest and pay my debts gradually," what they're really saying is, "I want to feel rich whilst I'm still poor." That's an emotional strategy disguised as financial planning. And emotion is the enemy of rational finance. I remember a young man who asked me, "Mr. Munger, shouldn't I invest instead of paying my student loans? The market always goes up in the long run." I answered, "Son, the market goes up in the long run, but you don't live in the long run. You live month to month, year to year, and debt compounds every single day." He was disappointed because he wanted a clever answer. But in life, it's simple arithmetic that saves you, not sophisticated theories. People seek leverage because they hate the slow path. They can't stand the idea of spending 5 or 10 years sorting their finances before investing. So they skip steps. Invest first. Say they'll manage the risk. But reality doesn't care about your impatience. If you skip the boring steps, you don't accelerate. You explode. Warren and I built Berkshire on a simple foundation. Discipline first, growth second. That's why we never had to sell assets in a panic. That's why we sailed through 1973, 1987, and 2008 without losing sleep. Because we never let debt dictate our decisions. Most people don't have that luxury. Not because they can't, but because they won't. They're addicted to comfort, can't delay gratification. So they try to engineer it with leverage. They want to look successful today instead of being successful tomorrow. I've seen that film end the same way every time. Debt gives you a little push at the start, then starts devouring you bit by bit. It's like sugar. Quick energy, long-term rot. And here's the most tragic part. When you live in debt, you lose risk tolerance exactly when the best opportunities appear. You watch the market crash, and instead of buying, you panic because you need liquidity to survive. The brave become cowards. The reckless go broke. Debt doesn't just destroy your finances. It destroys your timing, makes you a slave to volatility, forces you to react, not think. I've said many times, the best investors in the world don't need constant excitement. They need endurance. And endurance only comes from strength. And you're not strong when you're leveraged. So yes, most people get it backwards. They think investing will save them from debt. Actually, it's avoiding debt that allows you to become a great investor. It's the boring work, saving, living below your means, cutting expenses, that builds the foundation for compounding. But people skip that because it doesn't look good on Instagram. They want fast results, not permanent ones. But the world rewards what's permanent. And the financial graveyard is full of people who confused speed with intelligence. My advice is simple. If you ever find yourself bragging about how efficiently you use debt, stop. You're one crisis away from humility. Debt doesn't just take your money. It takes your time. And time, as I've said all my life, is the raw material of compounding. Compound interest only works when you give it decades to operate. Debt destroys that timeline, forces you to focus on the next payment, not the next decade. That's the point almost everyone misses. Most people think the cost of debt is just the interest rate. It's not. The real cost is distraction. It steals your ability to think long-term, poisons your patience, which is the most valuable trait an investor can have. When you owe, your brain becomes a short-term machine. You start thinking in weeks and months, not years. You can't let investments mature, can't ride through rough patches. Can't stay rational when the creditor wants money and the market only offers chaos. Debt makes people fragile. And fragility is the enemy of compounding. I've known countless investors who could have built fortunes if only they'd managed to wait. But you don't wait when you're leveraged. You sell at the wrong time, for the wrong reason, to the wrong person. And you still call it discipline. No. That's not discipline. That's survival. Warren and I built our wealth by avoiding situations that forced us to act. We wanted to choose when to act, not be forced to. That's the difference between freedom and servitude. I've said it before. The first rule of compounding is don't interrupt it unnecessarily. Debt is the mother of all interruptions. It's the financial equivalent of pulling a plant out of the ground every few months to see if it's growing. And yet people keep doing it. Refinancing, taking new loans, rolling debts over. They call it financial management. I call it financial self-sabotage. There's a rule nobody teaches in school. Every unit of money you owe is a unit that can't compound in your favor. And every year spent paying off old mistakes is a year stolen from your future freedom. If you start investing at 25 and stay debt-free, time becomes your ally. If you start at 35, buried in loans, time becomes your enemy. Same person, different outcome, all because of leverage. Everyone loves talking about the power of compound interest, but they forget it works both ways. Debt compounds too, only in the opposite direction. It's like running a marathon, dragging an anchor. When you're free of debt, any small progress compounds. When you're in debt, even massive progress gets neutralized. That's why the rich stay rich. They let compounding work in their favor without interruption. And that's why the middle class stays trapped. They spend their entire lives compounding for the bank. It's a silent trap. Doesn't explode like a crisis. Corrodes like rust. One delay here. One refinancing there. One temporary loan. And suddenly you've lost 5 years of compounding power. People think getting rich is about intelligence. It's not. It's about staying in the game long enough for compounding to do the work. And debt kicks you out of the game too early. So next time someone brags about how they're leveraging intelligently, remember this. You don't beat compound interest by being clever. You beat it by being consistent. Debt interrupts consistency. And interruptions over a lifetime cost fortunes. Stay away from debt. Stay in the game. Let time carry the heavy lifting. That's how ordinary people become extraordinary investors. Slowly, quietly, without leverage. People keep asking the wrong question. Charlie, should I invest or pay my debts? As if it's a maths problem. It's not. It's a problem of ownership. Who owns your time? Who owns your peace of mind? Who owns the next 10 years of your life? If the answer isn't you, then the conversation is over. I've said it before. The world is full of people who look rich but aren't free. They drive leased cars, live in mortgaged houses, invest borrowed money. They've built beautiful cages and are too busy decorating to notice the lock on the door. That's the tragedy of modern finance. People confuse activity with progress. They think balancing investments and debts makes them sophisticated. But complexity doesn't make you smart. Simplicity makes you safe. I knew a lawyer in the 1960s. Very well educated. Sharp as a razor. Lived bragging about how he used intelligent leverage to invest in property. Gave everyone lectures about efficient capital allocation. One recession later, the bank owned everything. He didn't lose intelligence. He lost margin for error. That's what debt does. Removes your margin for error. And when you take that away, you remove your survival cushion. Warren and I never tried to be the smartest investors. We tried to be the ones left standing at the end. That's a much smaller target, and a much better one. When you're debt-free, you can wait. When everyone panics, you can think. When others sell, you can buy. And when opportunity knocks, you can open the door, because nobody's holding the handle from the outside. People think financial freedom is a destination. It's not. It's a condition. And it begins the moment nobody else owns your decisions. The modern investor wants freedom and leverage at the same time. But they're opposites. One gives you control. The other sells it. You can't be half independent the same way you can't be half pregnant. Either you're free or you're owned. If you still need to check with the bank before making a decision, you're owned. If you still calculate your risk tolerance based on the monthly payment, you're owned. If your peace depends on interest rates staying low, congratulations, you're renting tranquility. And rented tranquility always expires. People don't realize that debt is a subtle master. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Don't take risks. Don't quit your job. Don't wait for the right opportunity. It molds your behavior until you believe you're making decisions on your own. But you're not. You're just managing obligations. And the great irony is, Most people who fall into this trap only wanted to be financially responsible. They wanted to build credit history, use leverage intelligently, and ended up serving a system that never sleeps. I'm not saying don't invest. I'm saying earn the right to invest. You earn that right by buying back your own freedom, killing the debt that owns you. When you do that, the maths of compounding becomes your ally. You can sit still. Let time do the work. You can ignore the noise because you're not playing defense anymore. So the question isn't, should I invest or pay debts? The question is far simpler. Do you want to own your life or owe it? Choose once. Choose well. Because that choice compounds too. Debt sells you the illusion of speed. It whispers, why wait when you can have it now? But fast money is expensive money. And expensive money is the kind that costs you everything in the end. I've watched people take on debt for cars they didn't need, houses they couldn't afford, lifestyles they hadn't earned. They called it aspirational living. I call it voluntary imprisonment. Because here's what they don't tell you in the adverts. Every pound you borrow is a promise written against your future self. And your future self can't negotiate, can't refuse, can only pay. That's the cruelty of debt. It turns tomorrow into collateral for today. And when tomorrow arrives, you're shocked to discover you sold it years ago. Warren and I have always believed in one simple rule. If you can't afford it twice, you can't afford it once. That's not about being cheap. That's about being honest. Honest about what you actually own versus what you're pretending to own. Most people spend their lives pretending the car is theirs when the bank holds the title. Pretending the house is theirs when they're one redundancy away from foreclosure. Pretending they're investors when they're actually just gamblers on a payment plan. And the saddest part? They believe their own story. They've told it so many times that the lie becomes their identity. I'm building wealth. I'm leveraging intelligently. I'm optimizing my capital structure. No. You're decorating a prison cell and calling it interior design. I've said this before, and I'll say it until I'm gone. True wealth isn't about the size of your portfolio. It's about the size of your obligations. The smaller those are, the wealthier you actually are. A man with £1 million and no debt is richer than a man with 10 million and 5 million owed. Not on paper, maybe, but in every way that matters, sleep, peace, freedom, he's infinitely better off. Because the first man can make decisions. The second man can only make payments. And over time, the ability to make decisions compounds into wisdom. The obligation to make payments compounds into exhaustion. I don't care how clever you think you are. I don't care how sophisticated your financial models look. If debt is dictating your behavior, you're not free. You're managed. And the market, as I've learned over 99 years, does not reward the managed. It rewards the independent. The question people avoid is the only one that matters. Who owns you? Not who do you owe. Who owns you? Because debt isn't just a financial arrangement. It's an ownership transfer. You hand over your time, your choices, your mental bandwidth, and in return, you get the illusion of progress. I've met people earning 6 figures who are more enslaved than people earning 30,000, because the 6-figure earner owes 4 figures a month. Their income doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the mortgage company, the car finance firm, the credit card processor. They're just the middleman shuttling money from employer to creditor. That's not a career. That's a delivery service. People love to debate the nuances of good debt versus bad debt, as if labels change the mathematics. They don't. All debt does the same thing. It creates a claim on your future, and claims compound. You might say, but Charlie, what about a mortgage? Everyone has one. Yes, everyone does. That doesn't make it smart. It makes it common. And common is often just another word for stupid at scale. I'm not saying never borrow. I'm saying understand the price. The price isn't just interest. It's the invisible cost of living with a sword over your head. That cost shows up in ways you can't measure, in opportunities you don't take, in risks you won't accept, in conversations you avoid with your boss. Debt doesn't just charge interest on money. It charges interest on courage. I've watched people turn down dream jobs because they couldn't afford a pay cut during the transition. Watch them stay in toxic relationships because they needed dual income to cover the bills. Watch them ignore their health, their family, their sanity, because the payments never stop. And they tell themselves it's temporary, just a few more years. But a few more years becomes a decade. A decade becomes a lifetime. And one day they wake up at 60 realizing they spent 40 years working for the bank. That's not building wealth. That's renting existence. Warren and I built Berkshire on a different principle. We wanted options, not obligations. Options give you power. Obligations take it away. And we learned early that power isn't about how much you have. It's about how little you need. The less you need, the more dangerous you become. Dangerous to bad deals. Dangerous to exploitative employers. Dangerous to anyone trying to pressure you into decisions that benefit them, not you. But when you're in debt, you're not dangerous. You're compliant. You're manageable. You're exactly what the system wants you to be. And here's the brutal truth nobody wants to hear. The system doesn't want you free. It wants you leveraged. Because leveraged people don't make waves. They don't quit. Don't negotiate hard. Don't walk away from bad situations. They just keep paying. I've seen brilliant minds waste decades in jobs beneath them because debt held them hostage. Talent that should have been building companies, solving problems, creating value, instead spent grinding out just enough to cover obligations. What a waste. What a tragic, unnecessary waste. And the cruelest part? They did it to themselves. Nobody forced them to borrow. Nobody put a gun to their head and said, "Sign here." They volunteered because they wanted things now instead of later, because they believed the story that debt is a tool. Tools build. Debt doesn't build. It extracts, and it extracts until there's nothing left. So when someone asks me, Charlie, should I invest or pay my debts? I hear a different question. What they're really asking is, should I pretend to build wealth while staying enslaved, or should I actually become free? And when you phrase it that way, the answer is obvious. It's just not convenient. Freedom is never convenient. It requires sacrifice, requires saying no to things you want, requires living smaller than your ego demands, requires patience in a world that rewards speed. But freedom is the only thing that compounds without limit. Money compounds until you die. Freedom compounds beyond that, because free people raise free children, and free children build free societies. Debt does the opposite. It cascades. Indebted parents raise anxious children. Anxious children make fearful adults. And fearful adults build systems of control, not opportunity. That's the real cost of debt, not just the interest. The generational erosion of courage. So no, this isn't about being clever with money. This is about deciding what kind of life you want. And more importantly, who gets to decide it. Here's what it comes down to. A choice. Not a complicated financial calculation. Not a sophisticated optimization problem. A choice between two paths. Path 1. You own your life. You make decisions slowly, carefully, rationally. You wait for the right opportunities. You compound wisdom and capital without interruption. You sleep soundly. And over decades, you become unshakable. Path 2. You owe your life. You make decisions urgently, emotionally, defensively. You chase opportunities out of desperation. You interrupt compounding every time a payment comes due. You sleep poorly. And over decades, you become exhausted. Most people choose path 2 without realizing they've chosen it all. They just drift into it. One purchase at a time. One justification at a time. And by the time they notice, the cage door is locked. But here's the thing about cages. You can always open them from the inside. It just requires admitting you're in one. And most people would rather die than admit that. They'd rather pretend they're investors whilst they're actually debtors. Pretend they're building wealth whilst they're actually paying rent on someone else's capital. Pretend they're free while someone else holds the keys. I've lived through the Great Depression, a dozen recessions, countless market crashes, and one unchanging truth. Those who survive aren't the smartest. They're the most solvent. They're the ones who can sit still when everyone else is forced to move. And you can't sit still when you owe. You're permanently in motion, running to stand in place, paying yesterday's decisions with tomorrow's labor. That's not wealth creation. That's a treadmill. Warren and I didn't get rich by being geniuses. We got rich by being patient. And we could only be patient because nobody owned our time. Nobody could force us to sell. Nobody could dictate our decisions. We had something more valuable than intelligence. We had independence. And independence, properly deployed, beats intelligence every single time. So here's my final word on this. Stop asking if you should invest or pay debt. Start asking who you want to be in 10 years. Do you want to be the person who owns assets? Or the person who's owned by liabilities? Do you want to be the person making decisions? Or the person making payments? Do you want to build a portfolio? Or decorate a prison? Because those aren't the same thing. They never were. And no amount of financial engineering changes that. The path to freedom is simple, brutally simple. Spend less than you earn. Kill every debt that charges interest. Build a margin of safety so large that bad luck can't touch you. Then, and only then, start investing with money you actually own. It's not exciting. It's not fast. It won't make you look clever at dinner parties. But it works. And it keeps working. Year after year. Decade after decade. Until one day you wake up and realize nobody can tell you what to do. And that feeling, that unshakable independence, is worth more than every leveraged return you'll ever fantasize about. I've seen both paths. I've watched the leveraged players explode in spectacular fashion. And I've watched the patient, boring, debt-free investors compound into fortunes. The difference isn't intelligence. It's not education. It's not luck. It's a choice, made once, reinforced daily. The choice to own your time or sell it, to control your future or rent it, to build freedom or lease the appearance of success. That choice compounds, silently, relentlessly, until it defines your entire life. So choose well, choose clearly, and whatever you do, don't lie to yourself about which path you're on, because the market forgives a lot of mistakes, but it never forgives self-deception. Debt isn't a tool, it's a test of whether you have the discipline to delay gratification, the courage to live below your means, and the wisdom to value freedom over appearance. Most people fail that test, not because they're incapable, but because they never realized they were taking it. Now you know. Now you have no excuse. Are you building freedom or decorating your own prison? That's the only question that matters. And the answer determines everything.